Welcome back to iGen Politics. This is a podcast that makes politics engaging and relevant for all generations. This is Victor Shi, a sophomore at UCLA, the youngest elected delegate for Joe Biden, and one of the co-hosts of this podcast.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, the author of The Watergate Girl, based on my experience as the only woman on the trial team for the Watergate case. I'm also an MSNBC legal analyst, and I am the wearer of hashtag Jill's Pins. And today's pins are special for our guest and for our producer. They are Politicon pins from a past Politicon live event, which I hope will resume soon. And they feature people who are talked about by our next guest. It has Nixon, John Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. And so I hope that our guests will appreciate these as our producers will.
For sure. Not many TV anchors were early members of the Peace Corps and then started their career as a Capitol Police officer, then transitioning into working for 4 top members of Congress, running for a House seat, writing speeches for President Jimmy Carter, and serving as the chief of staff for the legendary Tip ONeill, former Speaker of the House. It is with this unique background that made our guest today one of our nation's leading cable TV hosts, asking questions to some of the world's most powerful leaders that needed to be asked.
Those clues are probably enough for you to guess that our guest today is Chris Matthews, former host of MSNBC's Hardball, a show I was honored and privileged to be a guest on many times. Chris is also the author of a brand new book that Victor and I enjoyed very much, This Country, My Life in Politics and History. Chris is also the author of numerous other books on a wide array of topics, including Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, and how politics is played. Chris, we are so glad to have you with us today, and we can't wait for the audience to get to know you and more about your latest book.
All right, so let's get started. So we're so grateful to have you here with us, Chris. And you start your book by describing your fascination with politics and how it started at quite a young age when your family visited Washington, D.C. Describe that moment when young Chris Matthews thought about politics and how it has impacted everything since then.
Well, curiosity is hard to plumb. It's hard to get to the bottom of your curiosity. I mean, I do remember sitting in a movie theater back when people went to the movies a couple of times a week, practically back in the early 50s. This would be early 52. And I must have been about 6. And I was sitting next to my dad, who had where he was a court reporter, so he could take off some time, different days, weird days. He would get downtown and go to the movies with him. And they had the newsreels in those days. The big newsreels would come on, and there was a high-ranking military guy. And of course, my brother Bert and I were huge about World War II. We were always playing war games and everything. And on this impressive-looking high-ranking officer was boarding a plane or getting off a plane. And I asked my dad, who was sitting to my right, is he president? And my dad says, no, but he will be. And it was Dwight Eisenhower. So that's sort of my first sort of experience in seeing a big shot politician in action and getting the feel on what my dad's view of the guy, because my dad said it positively. He's Republican, and a lot of people were becoming Republican in 52 after 20 years of the Democrats in Harry Truman. So, that's my first. So I do know I was catching on, and of course, I rooted for Eisenhower as a kid in school. I remember another kid named Michael Matthews, whose father was the Democratic committeeman, and he was rooting for Stevenson. I felt sorry for him because it seems like, what happened here? Have we gone off here?
Oh, you're still there.
Okay, I'm sorry. You disappeared. And I think that was the beginning, and it went on through the Hungarian revolt against the Russians. I remember that very clearly, rooting for the Hungarians when they threw cobblestones at the tanks. What do they call them? The Warsaw Pact countries had come in to sort of shut down their revolution. And of course, the Cuban Revolution, all these international events were driving my interest in politics. I was never big on local sewer projects or local politics. I was always about the big picture, where we stood in the world and where the federal government fit in our lives. And I was pretty conservative about that, libertarian. Well, there we are.
Okay, so
it was so interesting listening to that, Chris, because I grew up in a Democratic family, and my first politics was when I was in third grade and Adlai Stevenson lost. And
Yeah.
I cried.
I understand that family. I get your family. I know the values. He was the eloquent, thoughtful, good liberal. He was not very left, and he was a practical guy.
Right.
The Republicans made him into an egghead because he was bald, and they made him into a sort of a lefty professor type.
Right.
But he wasn't at all like that. I mean, he was a product of the Chicago machine. Jake Arvey picked him for that job, picked Paul Douglas for U.S. Senate. In those days, the old corrupt machines would pick high quality candidates in the back room.
It was a system that worked back then. And because Victor and I are from Chicago, we certainly appreciate it.
And I appreciate it extra because my high school was named after Stevenson, Adlai E. Stevenson High School. But, unlike Jill and like you, Chris, my parents are Republicans. And I'm wondering what it was like for you to grow up in a Republican household.
Well, my dad was a cloth coat Republican. That's an old Nixon term, but he was not rich. He worked for the city, and he worked hard. We're middle people living in a nice house in the suburbs, right on the city limits. We all got to go to private Catholic school. We had braces for our teeth. We had piano lessons. We had a house at the shore. We lived very well because my parents were very safe. They threw, as they say in Massachusetts, they threw half dollars around like manhole covers. They did not spend money. My dad never bought a Coke on the way home from work. Never. He would buy a bulletin and read the paper. He never wasted money, never went to a nightclub. We never had steaks. They were really classic, self-reliant, good Republicans. They believed in less government, less interference in our lives, less taxes, but he did believe in Social Security and those basics. So I think he was a classic sort of Pennsylvania Republican. And they're all gone now, almost all, that Republican crowd. He wasn't in the party for tax bracket, So I would say our parents were very conservative. We couldn't go to certain dances. We couldn't, mainly because we were Catholic and they didn't want us going to the Episcopalian dance on a Friday night. So they were watching the sort of the tribal door there, But I would say they were suspicious of big city politics. They took the view that big cities like Philadelphia were corrupt and that they had to overcome a big popular vote disadvantage coming out of the city. They had to win it in the country, in the suburbs, and in the rest of the state. So I grew up in a, Bill Scranton, Tom Ridge type place. My dad even voted for Goldwater because he's a Republican, and he was pretty loyal to that party. In fact, we're Catholic. He was a convert to Catholicism, and I only found out recently that my mom voted for Kennedy in 1960 and never told Dad her whole life. She never told Dad that she voted for Kennedy for fear it would upset him. Isn't that interesting?
No, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned that you began as an avid Nixon and Goldwater supporter, yet, you ended up working for Democrats your whole career. And I'm wondering how your values and political outlook changed throughout your years, or if at all they changed.
Emotionally, I think it was the Kennedy assassination, which I think is very hard for somebody of your generation to understand the power of that. I mean, here's a guy who I thought was extremely interesting. I thought he was a bit ruthless in the sense of when they knocked off President Ziem, who Kennedy had been for since the 50s. He had been a friend of Vietnam and supported President Ziem. And we definitely had a hand in that coup, which ended up costing that Ziem and his brother's life. But I always thought when Kennedy was killed, I just can't explain to you the emotion of it to me. And maybe because I was on the other side politically, it hit me very hard. And it's still a thing I think about more than 9/11 or January 6th. To me, that was the great, tumult of my emotions. I just, all of a sudden, the president of the United States, an hour later, he's not president of the United States. It's gone as Julius Caesar. He's gone. He doesn't exist. This guy who was the center of all conversation and all romance and politics. And we picked him. And it didn't matter that we picked him. I think that was the big message to me. You You can choose a president, but you can't guarantee you're going to get that president. And of course, we live in a violent country. We've had, since 1860, almost every 20 years, we've lost a president through violence. And Harry Truman almost got killed, and Teddy Roosevelt almost got killed, and FDR almost got killed by gunfire. But I think that was a big change. Vietnam, of course, but civil rights, of course. But one of the ironies of history, Jill knows this, the ironies of history is that the Republican Party provided most of the votes for the Civil Rights Act in the U.S. Senate. Everett Dirksen of Illinois, they provided the votes. It wasn't the Democratic Party was in bed with the segregationists. And they've been playing that game since certainly the New Deal, maybe, back to the Civil War, of course. And you had John Sparkman running on the Democratic ticket with Stevenson, who was an outright segregationist from Alabama. I mean, think about that today. It's awful. And it was the Republicans who were the liberal in that. Nixon was a member of the NAACP, a Quaker, believed in civil rights, tried to get rid of the filibuster in 1957 as vice president. And it was the liberal Democrats who stayed in league with the Southern Democrats and killed his chance, his move to get rid of the filibuster. So there are a lot of dirty hands on that thing, not just from the South. They were playing ball with partisan politics. So I turned because of the Vietnam War, because of civil rights, because of Kennedy assassination. But I would say the emotion was with the Kennedy assassination.
And the general politics of your generation and mine, is that what drove you to get involved in government in some capacity?
Joe, when I came back from the Peace Corps in Africa, and I finally worked my way home, I wasn't draft eligible anymore. I had a number through the roof, like 312 in the draft. You're not getting anywhere near the draft with a number like that. And but when you came to Capitol Hill, you were defined by your hair length. If you had longish hair, you can't get a job in a conservative Democrat or Republican office. But you could in the anti-war offices like Hatfield or maybe Percy, So there were anti-war Republicans or John Sherman Cooper. So it was all defined by the war. I remember going into a Southerner congressman. I was desperate looking for a job. And he finally said, I think if you worked in my office, people would get the idea that you had some idealism that you brought back from the Peace Corps. Idealism, meaning I wasn't a racist. That's what he meant. And it was so flagrant. And he said, I'm sure you, with your long hair and your hairstyle, he called it, and your way of speaking, meaning fast, you could probably find some Northern guy that would hire you, which in fact didn't happen, but I got a job with another guy from out West, but Frank Moss from Utah. But it was all defined. It was all defined by the war and your position on the war. It was in your hair. It was in the way you dressed. I mean, it wasn't partisan politics. It was war politics.
So I want to go to a couple things that you've mentioned now. One is the Peace Corps, because you were a volunteer with the Peace Corps in its infancy, and you went to Swaziland right after graduating college at Holy Cross. And what made you decide to go to the Peace Corps? And did you have a particular interest in Swaziland, or how did you end up there?
Well, I really had done a year of grad school at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, right before, and I was working on a PhD and I had a full ride. I mean, a real full ride. They were paying for everything. And I wanted to go into economic development. I wanted to do third world development. I imagined myself somewhere in a third world country working with economic planners and doing something big ticket like that. And I didn't. I applied to the Peace Corps. I got offered to a job in Venezuela, a job in Kenya dealing with water projects. And I said, this isn't what I wanted to do mentally. I want to do something somewhat mental. So it's something that would use my education. And all of a sudden, this African-American kid comes in to see me. He's walking around campus and he comes up to, and we somehow hook up, and he hands me a brochure. It's like like real estate lots in Arizona or something. It's a brochure about going to Swaziland and working in this new government program of small business development, getting local people involved in the local commerce. Basically, the commerce was controlled by Indians and by the white people, the expats. But they wanted the Black Africans to get a bigger role in the economy. So I said, that's perfect. That's what I want to do. So I'm a Hemingway buff, Tarzan buff as a kid, of course, back in those days. I wanted to go to Africa. Africa is where I wanted to go, and I got in. They said you needed an MBA, and I convinced them that a year of grad school was equivalent to an MBA, which it's not, but I convinced them of that, and I got in, and it was great. And I was lucky. The best thing I ever had, Jim, was the best thing I ever did in my life, was get out. Didn't understand economics. I went into economics because it was about philosophy. It was about John Stuart Mill and Adam Smith and Marx and all that. It was all about ideas and the individual and society. And I said, that's what excited me about economics. It wasn't the highly quantitative stuff that I get into at grad school, which I didn't have any interest in. But Africa was exciting to me. And I was 22 and I went over there, and I came back in 25. I was 25. So I spent a good chunk of my youth, my young adulthood, in Africa, riding around in a motorcycle in the veldt, in the bush veldt, with the escarpment in the distance, just like in Tarzan, the escarpment along the horizon. And I'm out there as the only white guy in sight, or even in memory of a lot of these people I was working with. And they were wonderful to me. These guys are about probably in their 40s or 50 years old. These guys treated me like their kid. They were great. And I had sword courses I organized, a national industrial fair I put together. And I also got to do some hitchhiking. I hitchhiked all the way to Kilimanjaro from Swaziland. Look at that on the map. It's pretty impressive with my thumb out. My thumb, that was my travel method all the way through East Africa. So then I came back and looked for a job. I wanted to be Ted Sorensen. I wanted to be a speechwriter to a president. That's what I wanted to do. And I got to do it. I got to be Jimmy Carter speechwriter right to the end.
Okay, we're going to get to that. Let's stick a little bit with Swaziland. And sounds like in addition to teaching, you were learning while you were there. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about what
I think you got to learn about humanity, that as much as people are different in appearance, obviously, and in culture, religion, we're humans. It's just imagine if you're on a desert island and somebody shows up, you're really not going to complain about what they're like. You're just thrilled that somebody showed up. It's just true. And they're good company. And I got to know people individually, which I think is the Peace Corps dream. I wrote that in the book. I said, getting to know people personally is what the Peace Corps is about, and bridging the cultural gaps, and being able to be with somebody. And I also discovered that nationalism is not unique to the United States by any means. We are a nationalistic country. Even liberals are nationalists. We're all not liberal. We all love this country, and we think it is special, and we are very jealous of any attempt to screw with us. And Africans are just the same way. Swazis, they knew the British were pretty efficient in running their country. I'm sure they knew that. The buildings were better kept up. The farming was more advanced. There's all reasons that colonialism has its case. But you ask anybody who's been under colonialism, anybody who's been ruled by a colonial power, and they'll say, we don't want that again. We'll take anything we can get from our own people. We are absolute nationalists. So I once kidded the guy about being in the CIA. I said, of course, I'm in the CIA. Like, sarcasm isn't so easy to translate to other cultures. He said, never say that again. Never say that again. Because he didn't understand. I don't know if sarcasm may be unique to our culture, the British maybe too, but it doesn't travel well. But they're very, very nationalistic about the Swazi people. And so I think that's another thing I learned, that we're a big country. Those are small countries, but they have just as much spirit about their country as we do, just as much.
You mentioned your hair, and I think your whole book is written in such a very conversational tone and is so wonderful and delightful to read. But I loved your description of when you came back and had to get a buzz cut, basically, in order to have
I actually was scrolling through the pictures, which were amazing. And one picture seems to show how long his hair was.
Yeah.
I think that's a side shot of you in Swaziland. But
our Peace Corps director would give us trouble about that. It'd say, distinguish yourselves in ways that are significant. Don't just have long hair to make some sort of stupid lefty point, But the fact is, trying to find a barber over there, I think I finally found one, and he just cut off all my hair. It's like the army. The girl I was going out with at the time was kind of surprised by that. not positively either. But yeah, hair was there. I mean, we were a little bit probably, what was the right word? Too casual about that. Because I think the African people I worked with knew this hair was not common in America to have long hair. But they didn't care that much. There's too many other differences to sort of get around. And we were 60s people. This is like 69, 70. There's no way in the world you could have short hair then. You know? There are a lot of other rules that were broken over there when I was there, which I'll not go into. But it was the 60s. It was the music. It was everything. And fortunately, nobody drank too much. That was sort of interesting. There wasn't a drinking problem. I'm telling you, that was one good side effect of the 60s. People didn't drink a lot. They did other things. I still was a casual drinker, and I'm not big on the other pastimes that some of the other guys were into, but that's me.
You know, you mentioned in your book that you urge everyone to make the most of their 20s. And as someone who is close to being 20, and because our podcast has listeners about that age, talk to us more about why that's such a critical moment of our lives and how to make the most of it as you did.
Well, I think it's more possible after school, if you don't have too much debt to pay off right away, to do something wild. And for some people, the military experience is good. For some, it is leadership ability and all that stuff. And I think that's good for some people. There's a phrase called a good war. Even horrendous wars, some get through it all right. I think travel is great. I do think that being a tourist is one thing. Somehow hitchhiking around is a great way to meet people. Hitchhiking is amazing. We came across, when we were in Africa, we'd always meet West Germans and Australians. They just seem to these two countries just make it a practice of getting away from, especially Australians, get out of the country. They're so far away from everybody else in the world. They're their own continent. They'd get out there and see the world. And before you come back and become a dentist or whatever else you're going to do, you know, you're going to become a doctor, whatever you're going to do, or a business person, but get out there first while you still can to see the world. Because, you know, it's not just adventure, it's courage. And, you know, look at the people we look up to in our lives. I mean, Churchill escaping from the Boers. In fact, he escaped right near where I was in Swaziland. I look at it on the map and I'd say, well, that's where Churchill's snuck on that train ride to Lorenzo Marques to Portuguese East Africa. Or, you know, or John Kennedy in PT 109, or Ernest Hemingway getting injured as an ambulance driver in Italy in World War I. I think you need some adventure in your life, and you got to pack it into your 20s. And luckily you'll get through it. But if you don't go through it, you have nothing to savor, nothing to say when you have a beer or something, or smoke a cigar or something in the middle of the night, and you're thinking about Swaziland. I'm telling you, you are. You know that Kipling one, come ye back, ye soldier boy, come ye back to Mandalay. You know, you have to have that memory. And I'm a big romantic about that. If you can get through something adventurous alive, you're better off than I sense that when I tell these stories to like a dentist working on me. And you can tell this guy went right to dental school, went right to work, and never did anything else. You know, most people do that. They go right to business school, or law school, and they get right into the partnership track, and they never do anything in their lives except do this one thing. And maybe that's the smart thing to do, but it's not very much fun. It's not life. Life has to have an arc. And I think one of the first stages of the arc is adventure and possibly some guts. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's also what's distinguished, you know.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, Jill has told me all about her adventures, and it's been so amazing to hear like her jumping off of planes and on everything that she's done. So I think adventure and uncertainty and like embracing those aspects of life are definitely important lessons for young people. But I just want to move on and talk about, you know, after the Peace Corps, you took your political ambition to DC and describe kind of desperately looking for a job on the Hill and said it was tough and you got a lot of rejections. I'm wondering first, what made you want to keep going? And then also, perhaps second, how do young people also maintain that type of zeal and kind of face rejection?
Well, just to have a teaching moment here. When I was looking for a job, that Southern congressman from Jim Collins from Texas, he said to me after he rejected me, he said the following. He said, I used to sell insurance, I guess life insurance, door to door. And here's what I learned as a rule of thumb. If I went to 100 doors, knocked on 100 doors, usually the wife is home. This is in the 50s. I get 9 invitations back to meet the husband. And if I got 9 invitations back, which I regularly got out of 100, I would get 3 sales. So to get the 3 sales, you have to have 9 meetings. To get the 9 meetings, you have to knock on 100 doors, which is the rule there is some people are going to go for your act and some are not. And in life, some people are going to like you the minute they meet you. And I think a lesser number are just not going to like you. Either they're competing with you, you're different than them, or whatever it is, they're just not going to be helpful. In fact, they may be an adversary. But you will meet people that are going to go for you. I always look at Bill Clinton this way. Bill Clinton spends his life knowing that half the country probably or almost doesn't like him. They don't like him because of Monica, because of his wife, because of him, because of his party or his manner, his self-confidence. They just don't like him. And he didn't care because he knows 40 to 50% of the country really likes him. And he walks in the room and he glories in it. He can do this. You can't expect unanimous consent from society. It's hard to accept it. But once you've accepted it, you are free because you recognize when you walk down the street, when those people say hello to you, come up to you if you're in public life, go with them. Forget the other people. Go with the ones that like it. Be nice to them. Help them out. Be with them. Enjoy their friendship. And take the job they offer you because the other guy's not going to offer you a job. So my experience has been learn the hard way. When I came to Capitol Hill, there was no big terrorist threats, although there was the bombing of the Capitol. You could still walk in the door. You could still walk around with resumes. You could still go door to door. You could pick out a list of, I started with all the Irish guys, Irish American guys. I was quite open about it. I went the Irish American guys. I didn't get anywhere with them. Then I worked other Democrats, and then I went for moderate anti-war Republicans. And then I went anywhere. But I ended up getting a job with a nice liberal senator from Utah, and I got the job as Capitol Policeman at nighttime under his patronage. If I'd work in the office from around 11 in the morning to around 3, writing answers to complicated mail, trying to learn how to write a speech. And then about 3 months later, I got the full-time legislative assistant job because I kept pushing for it. But not everybody does it this way. I remember a guy who saw me in my police uniform and he said, is it that bad? Like this is the worst thing you could do is become a cop, But it wasn't that bad for me. I said, fine, I'll do this if this is what it takes, I didn't have any money left. The Peace Corps didn't make me rich, by the way. So I came back with very little money. And I was almost out of money. And I took the job that was available. And there was no going back from that. It was a smart move.
I mean, in describing how you got that job, you use the term patronage. And I think that's a word that my generation doesn't know, or at least I didn't know kind of what patronage meant. Can you describe patronage? And
it means every job on Capitol Hill, there's 12,000 jobs up there. Every one of them is controlled almost directly by an elected official. And now there's something of a civil service type environment around the police, but generally the police are much more professional, obviously. But like the guy who runs the printer down the basement, the people, the barbers, the people that have the franchises for the dining rooms and the snack bars and all that, the coffee people, everything, the beauty salons, everything is up, and it ought to be. This is the legislative branch of government. It's up to elected officials. So they delegate some of that power. But when I went up there, it was like a plantation. I said, you can live on this hill. You can get your hair cut here. You can have a credit union account. You can eat here all day. You can probably sleep in your room. This place is pretty self-supporting, but it's all based on who the boss is and who you owe your job to. And if you forget that, you're in trouble. You got to always, and the trouble with that it creates a sort of a manipulative environment where people come there in their young years, in their 20s, and they learn how to manipulate the system all the time, sucking up to the person that they're working for, but not necessarily doing the public's business. They just know how to work these people. And so the patronage system has that problem of sycophancy. You just learn how to serve at the pleasure of the boss. And that doesn't mean your character is going to be. So I think I said in the book that if you don't come to Capitol Hill with a good character, you're not going to learn one there. It's not the place to learn values. Politics, you do not learn your values in politics. You have to bring your values to politics. That's what I believe. It's too easy to play the game. I can say the same about the media, by the way, Jill. Say about the media. Not everybody develops great values, which is teaching truth, which is what your job is, not to sell an argument, but to teach the truth, all of it.
So I want to ask you more about your Capitol Police job, because at first glance, I wouldn't guess that you were a Capitol Police, but you were a Capitol Police officer. And given what happened on January 6th, how did it make you feel to be a part of that same law enforcement at the Capitol when it was under attack, and having worked for so many members that the police were now defending?
Well, the camera work, we're a victim of the evidence as it came in. And as it came in, it made it look like the cops were collaborating in some cases. Well, later on, we got better pictures and we realized that they were being incredibly courageous and standing up against this. The failure was at the top, the failure to provide them with riot gear. Now, when I was a cop, and by the way, the short answer, I felt violated. I hated what I saw. Those goofy people, idiots, with their costumes and their horns on and everything, running around defiling the place. I felt that way because I was an AA top aide to the speaker, and because I worked up there for all those years with the Senate, and off and on for 15 years. I hated what I saw. I was proud of that building. I was proud of the fact that Lincoln gave his second inaugural there, or that they passed the Civil Rights Bill in 64 there. Amazing things happened. They debated slavery back in the 50s, the antebellum years. It's a cathedral to democracy. It's where it all comes together, our system. But I felt that I lost my thought. I've had a lot of feelings about that place. And I thought that back in 1971, when I was a cop, there was a big May Day demonstration against the Vietnam War, mostly college kids, not particularly dangerous, but college kids, anti-war. 12,000 showed up. In fact, a friend of mine from the Peace Corps, I found out later, was in that group. He got field arrested. They all got hauled down to the RFK Stadium. It was an amazing mass arrest of people. But in addition to planning who they're going to arrest and how they're going to handle on-site field arrests, they also had a field force within the Capitol building, which they kept in reserve. And I saw these guys. They're men. They're wearing riot gear. They had shields. They had helmets. They would go to war. They were ready to go to war if the crowd got out of hand. And they had them in reserve. They never used them. But they were there in case something broke. Now, why didn't they do that on January 6th? Why didn't the leaders of the Capitol Police, the sergeants at arms, the leaders of Congress, Democrat and Republican, Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, why didn't they provide a reserve force, cavalry on the Hill, if you will? Why didn't they do that? Why weren't they ready? They knew trouble was coming. And they could have done that without intimidating the crowd at all. They could have done it. And then when they tried to break through the doors, these people would have rushed to the doors with shields and their helmets, and they would have repelled them. They made about a few heads. They should have carried nightsticks too. You don't have to carry guns. Nightsticks will do the job. Just push them out of the building. And then none of this would have happened. But they didn't have a reserve force. They didn't have a contingency plan because the leadership at the top betrayed their trust. They really did. They didn't do the job. And they left it to the rank and file officers in their daily civil usual uniforms to hold back this crowd. And I think they did an amazing effort to try to do it. And they couldn't do it because they weren't led well. They weren't led. And that's a problem of any business. Or, you have lifeboats on ships, you have a reserve. I mean, this is how things work, You have systems on elevators that they broke, that they don't just go to the basement. It's just, this is how you build things and provide for them. And I didn't think they provided the leadership they should have. So that's what I felt. Didn't do the job at the top. But I am glad that most of the cops did their job, because I did think, I remember a guy working with a guy who said to me, I'd die for this building when I was working with him. So the patriotism in most cases was, to me, manifest.
I mean, it was a real display of courage. And I'm wondering what you think is the best way to honor those police officers who protected members of Congress that day. And I guess what it says to you that Republicans won't honor them by passing a commission or investigating what happened on January 6th or awarding them with congressional
CYA, because it's CYA. They're covering their ass. They didn't do their job, and it was their president, their political leader, Donald Trump, who sparked the whole thing. Go to Capitol Hill, raise hell. Well, I don't know if we'll ever find out how much detail he had from the real troublemakers or not. I don't know, but he certainly inspired them, and in his name. And to this day, 3 out of 10 Republicans believe that he'll be reinstated August 1st. Well, that's coming up. That's 5 weeks from now. What kind of trouble is that going to ignite? We don't know, but if 3 out of 10 Republicans think he's going to be reinstated, they're going to be wrong. There's no word. In fact, I don't think you can do a Google check on the word reinstatement in the U.S. Constitution. You're not going to come up with it. It's not a word that they used back in the late 18th century. I don't think they used the word reinstated a president. But he's telling them that stuff.
In your book, you related to this, you write about one of the first lessons that you learned working for Senator Moss is that the greatest politicians are those who stand alone when everyone else is either bucking or ducking. And I think what you're referring to is the fact that there are so few politicians, at least on the Republican side, who are willing to stand alone right now. And I'm wondering if you agree with that, and what do you think could change that? How can we get members of the Congress to stand up and speak the truth?
Well, this is something that scares me about our political culture, and that's the docility with which people behave these days. You look at the 30s, you look at Germany, Japan, I suppose, you look at those countries, look how people just cheering the war hawks, cheering the people who want war, who are thrilled by it. They're cheering the leaders of their countries because they're taking them to war. They're thrilled by it. They're open to any charge. That the Poles invaded Germany? Are you kidding me? Did they actually believe in that Case White? They believed the argument that Hitler was able to convince his people that they were invaded by Poland, and that's why they invaded Poland? I mean, people willing to accept anything in this sort of hysteria. The belief that Trump will come back in August, or that elections were stolen wholesale in 3 or 4 states. Really? I know somebody who was yesterday who believes that stuff. How can you believe that? These elections are decided by 50,000 votes, 70,000 votes. I mean, you can talk about a case or that in some precinct somewhere in Chicago or some Philadelphia state Senate district where somebody did something they shouldn't. But the idea of elections being stolen, they don't get stolen in this country. It doesn't happen. We don't have evidence of it. And we should believe in our system, and to have somebody running around like this ex-president telling everybody we have rigged elections, I think it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I mean, the founding fathers forgot one thing. They didn't imagine that there'd be a person, man or woman, Republican or Democrat or whatever, who would actually lie about election results, who would actually run for president, serve as president, in fact, and then say the elections are rigged, who wouldn't give a concession speech, which is a critical thing. Kennedy needed Nixon to say he won the election, and Nixon said, okay, you won. He knew there were questions about Chicago. He knew there were questions about Texas. But he said this country cannot be undercut by suspicions about who's president. And Nixon met with him down in Key Biscayne. I just wrote an article about this and sat with him drinking Cokes where all the photographers around and made it very clear Kennedy had won the election. Because we were in a Cold War situation, and you can't just mess things up like that by saying, I'm not conceding. And Al Gore conceded his election, even after winning the popular vote by 500,000. Hillary Clinton won by 4 million votes in the popular vote, and she conceded the next morning. She didn't wait for 2 days or 3 days. She said, I lost. That was noble and honest and good. This guy, Trump, doesn't have it in him to show character, even to pretend character. He won't even say the obvious. And he's got these fools serving him, these people that are willing to carry out. I mean, Kevin McCarthy's an embarrassment. He knows better. He actually has said that Joe Biden won the election, but he will not take on Trump. But Liz Cheney, of all people, and I disagree with her dad, certainly about the Iraq War, she should shown a profile and courage. There's no doubt about it. And I'm willing to say that whatever differences we have, I'm no neocon, I'm no hawk, but she's standing alone out there in Wyoming, and she has to take on a primary opponent. If she's lucky, you know how the game played. If she has two opponents, she'll probably win. If she has one opponent, it's going to be tough. But she's going to fight this battle, you know?
Well, I hope we get back to a time when we have more people who are willing to stand up and speak the truth. And you certainly have throughout your career. One thing people may not know in our audience is that after you left the Senate working as a staffer, you ran for a seat in the House from Pennsylvania. And you wanted...
Well, I didn't have any money. But I did have a cause, which was money in politics. I went around. I had a wonderful woman, Marilyn Funk, who was on her way to going into the Peace Corps. They did later go into the Peace Corps. Just had the nerve to call up all the high schools in the district, northeastern Philadelphia, Catholic and public. It was a huge Catholic school population back then, and allowed for me to speak in their civics classes. And I'd come in and do a sort of a Billy Graham kind of speech, call to arms about evils of money in politics. And I said to kids, you want to get rid of money in politics? You be the big shots. You volunteer. We'll do this together. And they did. They came back to the back of the room and filled out these index cards. Next thing I know, I had a campaign. I go out on the main boulevard in Philadelphia, Roosevelt Boulevard, and they'd all stand there waving and honking wave signs, get people to blow their horns when they go by, and I'm waving, and my family members are waving. And we did shopping malls. And during the week, I'd be doing supermarkets. And we got some literature finally done. It was really good. And I got some notice in the papers, the Philadelphia Inquirer. We had a quarter of the vote against the machine. I felt at the end of it like I'd let these kids down, that they thought I was going to win. I knew it was a long shot. And they were thrilled that they had done it. And I still have the spiral notebooks of these kids and how they handled different voting stations, how we covered them all. And it can be done. Well, I mean, losing isn't great, but it didn't hurt anybody. And I thought it was inspiring. And I hope all these kids remember that experience and said, yeah, I worked in a campaign once. Maybe some of them went on to other campaigns. But
interesting was
I'm just glad I did. It's like everything I've done. I'm glad I did it. You know, I'm glad I did the Peace Corps. I'm certainly glad I ran for Congress. I'm certainly glad I knocked on doors on Capitol Hill. And I'm also glad I finally went into journalism, which is maybe where I belong. But I do feel that pull back and forth between politics and journalism still.
And you wouldn't accept political contributions when you were running for office.
Well, can I give you the honest answer? It wasn't in the book. I didn't know anybody that would give me any money. I wasn't hooked in with any big shots. We didn't know any big shots in our family. I didn't know who these people with money. I can imagine going to somebody and saying, can I have $100 or $1,000? Who would I go to? I didn't know the list. Today I could do it. But, you know, I was an outsider. I was a regular nobody. And but the Nader connection made it. Ralph Nader was a god back then. He was a consumer advocate. He was a challenger of the system, a reformer. It turns out a real man of the left, but very clean. Definitely an ideologue, but very clean. And he was an inspiration to a lot of people in those days.
Yeah. But
I worked for him briefly.
You ended up choosing, after that, you decided to be a speechwriter. And you got a job with President Carter, who I also was honored to work for. And I got my job through networking. Sarge Shriver and Pat Harris had been partners of mine. And one of the Watergate defendants' wives was on the transition team. And she was the one who really connected me. So how did you get connected to Jimmy Carter?
Well, sounds like you. I had worked in a Brooklyn campaign with a guy named Bob Schiffer, who's still a friend of mine. He's the one who's hooked me up with Fulbright University, Vietnam right now. I'm a professor out there now in Ho Chi Minh City. I'm going back again early next year. I'm teaching class. He got me involved with Rick Hertzberg, who's a New Yorker writer, who had become one of the speechwriters to President Carter. Rick and I became friends. We're still great friends. And when the time came to get it, they had an opening, and I pushed somebody else for one opening, and then there's another opening. I said, well, how about me, Rick? And they gave me a tryout, and I was working at the White House at the time. I was working on Jimmy Carter's reorganization project, his pet project to reform the federal government and streamline it. And then they gave me a tryout because they didn't think I'd proven myself in the background as a speechwriter. So luckily, the National Catholic Charities meeting was coming up, and Carter was speaking to them, and I was, I think, the only Catholic in sight in the White House. So I got to write that speech, and I knew how to write it. So I got the job after that. So it's a combination of connections and ability, I suppose, some kind of ability. But it's all followed. You know, I was going out with a woman at the time who told me about the White House job, the first White House job I got, and I went and did the interview, and I got that job. And usually it's like, you know, people give me ideas. You know, I was at the Peace Corps, and I got a call from a guy a couple of years ahead of me at Holy Cross College where I went, and he said, in his letter to me, I got the idea, you don't have, because he hadn't finished law school. He'd quit law school to do this job as a legislative assistant. I said, my God, you can be a legislative assistant without going to law school? I'm going. I'm going to do this thing. So you pick up information along the way that you use, you put to use.
I think networking is one of the greatest skills that people, particularly young people, don't learn. And I've been trying to teach Victor a little bit more about it. But you also said
let me tell you one advice, Victor. When you graduate from school, college or whatever, make sure you keep your friends. Try to keep a dozen of them, even if you got to work at it. But I mean, keep up with them. Tell them what you're doing, because sometimes an opportunity is going to come along to that network of people that it's going to fit you. They may need a lawyer. They may need an accountant. They may need whatever. They may need a PR person. And then I said, there's a job I just heard about. It's not for me, but I think it's perfect for you. And you got to get a wider net. And if you sit at home in your basement dreaming of what you want to do, nobody's coming to knock on the door. I've told this to everybody. Nobody's coming and knocking on the door of your house or apartment and say, I hear you'd like to do this. Never happens. It will never, ever happen. So you have to go out. And then Woody Allen's great phrase, show up. You have to show up and you have to network. And that's the only way it works. And not everybody has the personality for that. But I could do it. Anybody can do it. Just got to meet people and make connections. And because jobs are only open for like 2 weeks. And if you have to show your head in that 2 week period, the only way to do that is try a lot of places and hope that you're up during one of those 2 week periods. Because when somebody leaves a job, the boss is feverish to fill the job. And they think about who they know that's looking for it. And then if somebody, oh yeah, that guy's been coming around here days looking for a job, let's try him out or her out. It's a lot like that. It's opportunism.
Exactly. And you said, though, that speechwriting for President Carter was one of your favorite jobs ever. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, imagine you're sitting on Air Force One. That's all I have to say to you. Just imagine being on Air Force One. And Selectric 2 electric typewriter, the old style. And you're taking off at 45 degrees because that's how the Air Force planes take off, 45 degrees, right up in the air. And you're typing sort of diagonally. And you know that what you're writing is something the President of the United States is going to give it in the next stop. Come on. I don't have to describe. I just have to describe. You don't like that. You don't like anything. It's fun. It was fun. And flying around. And even before I got on the plane, I was working in the executive office but next to the White House, the West Wing, in a big cube of a room, a beautiful room with my perfect desk, which was really a table. And I'm knocking out speeches for the president. I loved it. Going to lunch at the White House mess, talking the scuttlebutt with the big shots, telling people you worked at the White House. I mean, my wife's roommates, my future wife's roommate, Kat, we've been married 41 years now, together 43 years. In 1978, when I came to pick her up for the first date after about 3 weeks of trying to get a hold of her, or trying to get a date, her roommates called me White House.
Exactly.
So there's no problem with that. That was a great story. There's a chapter on her in the book, but
right.
Yeah.
Kathy.
So, after working for the Carter administration, you worked for the legendary Speaker of the House, Tip ONeill, as chief of staff. What was it like to be under the wing of Tip ONeill?
Have you had a really hard job in your life, Victor? A really hard job, a really frightening job? That's what it was like. Tip ONeill accepted no failure. If something went wrong, it was somebody's fault. He had won 50 straight elections and primaries. He had no time for any mistakes. If you did something wrong, he spoke out of turn. It was menacing to deal with. He was so tough. And he was 6'3", he weighed about 280. He would stand right in your face and look you right in the face if he wanted to challenge you. It was a definite challenge to work for him. But he, in the end, after 6 years of being his wartime consigliere and fighting Reagan, he wrote the most amazing notes for me. He said, best in the business. That was my favorite, best in the business. And thanks for building my image. And even though I had the top title, administrative assistant, is a statutory position, he said to me. It was, in other words, an act of Congress created this position. I was really his wartime communications guy. My job was to write his stuff and get him into battle every morning. And he was great. He was courageous, big liberal guy, out of fashion, but wanted to go to work every day and do the job of taking on Reagan. And when he could, make a deal with him. He made some great deals with him. Saved Social Security, got rid of tax loopholes, lowered the rates, did stuff with Northern Ireland nobody knew about. I didn't even know about it at the time. And backed up Reagan with Gorbachev and ending the Cold War. He did all this. He did a lot of good stuff and fought most of the time. But in fact, I've got all my shenanigans in the book. I listed the numbers I pulled. And my favorite line when he'd go up to me and say, he may have only said this once to me, but I loved it. He said, "Is this one of yours?" Because when I pulled some big protest or something, I organized it. It looked like something I'd done. So he knew my ability to organize things, create shows of force that made the Democratic Party continue its cause.
It definitely seems like a tough job, a very intense job, but you talked about the numerous lessons of working for Tip, some of which include, daily courage, commitment. And on that point that you just mentioned, the importance of two politicians, Reagan, as well as Tip, of both political parties sitting next to each other and finding common ground, or, good old bipartisanship. Do you think that's still true now, that bipartisanship is
well, it has to
many
be,
pundits would say?
Well, I don't want to romanticize it too much, but I am romantic about it. I think there's urgent matters that have to be dealt with. Like we generally get along on wartime situations. Urgency of age. In this case, both these guys are in their last chapters. I'm sure Biden feels urgency right now. I wish Mitch McConnell felt urgency about government and not so much about the next election. The trouble is when they think only about the next election, that's all they think about. And that's no way to get anything done. And but Tip knew he had to save Social Security. Reagan wanted the monkey off his back because the Democrats have been hitting him hard on it. I think the Cold War spoke for itself. We were, my generation, we know what it was like to hide under our desks when the Soviet long-range bombers were going to attack with nuclear weapons. That was real. And getting into the Cold War was vital to get it over with. Just get it over with. Unfortunately, we still have Putin, who is a Russian nationalist and a big shot, and he might as well be still a Soviet. He wants the Soviet Union back in many ways. But I think urgency is a big part of it. I think knowing you can't just keep futzing around with things. We have a list of about 5 things everybody agrees we should do something with. Like, I'm not a defund the police person, but I do believe you need to get, when we dial 911, we want a good cop to show up, a courageous cop, man or woman, a courageous person dedicated to their job. That's a hell of an ideal. And I don't want to hear people talk like that. They don't freaking talk like that. It isn't that there's some bad behavior. That's obviously going to deal with. But we absolutely have to have an ideal, which is a good cop who's willing to risk their lives for us in terrible situations, domestic thing. But I'm afraid we went so far in one direction that if I were a cop today, I'd be talking to my spouse, and she'd probably say to me, "Don't take any risks tonight." You don't go into that club where everybody's drunk or strung out. Like, don't go into a domestic situation where the people are throwing frying pans at each other, knifing each other. Why would you go into a situation? You try to avoid those situations. And I think the criminal people know that's what's going on. That's why these crime rates are spiking. I think the bad guys, and they are bad guys, are out there thinking the cops are on the defensive now. We're going to exploit it. We'll see. This takes a few months to be sure of that. But I think we can. We got to be careful we don't go too much spending. We're going to get inflation. That's where the media should be coming in. The media should be covering. Yes, it'd be nice to pass some of these jobs bills and the infrastructure, but there will be a danger here of overspending and getting into the Phillips curve, which is you get into spending, you're going to create excess demand. Too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. You're going to have inflation. It comes with the territory. And the same with crime. If the police forces are hesitant or they fall back on their positions, they don't do their jobs, this is going to be a horror case. But the media has to provide information on both guardrails. Look at every situation from both directions. Infrastructure is good. Jobs are good. Too much spending, not good. Let's get it right. Policing should be improved. It should be policed itself. But too tough on the cops, we're not going to have any good cops anymore and doing their job. So I think nobody in the media doesn't like this. It's too easy to just say cops suck and they're bad and they're all racist and all. Or we need these spending programs and all this stuff from Larry Summers has to be ignored. Well, there's worry about inflation. Are you so sure you want to put some money on it?
I want to ask you about the media because that's something that Jill tells me a lot about. Back in the Nixon era, there were 3 media networks that gave the same facts versus now we have social media and these big networks giving, they can't even agree on facts. And I'm wondering how big of a role you think media has caused in kind of, I don't want to say killing bipartisanship, but kind of creating even more partisanship and kind of pushing people to the fringe.
Well, in court, I'm not a lawyer like Jill, but I mean, historically, you watch Perry Mason, you watch any court scene, they always say, you're supposed to tell the truth, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. Find somebody in the media that meets that standard. The whole truth and nothing but. No speculation and the whole truth, not just a truth. I think there's a lot of people in the media that tell a truth. They tell facts, but with one side of how to interpret them. They'll use facts to make a point they already wanted to make, like economics professors, political science professors. They all have an ideological point when they go into the classroom and they find facts to back it up. They're not lying exactly, but they're not telling the whole truth. And they're telling things beyond the truth. They're telling things they think and feel, but they don't have the truth. And I think we should get back to that. I mean, Walter Cronkite on CBS was the most trusted man in America, not because he was a liberal. He was a liberal. He told me that later on. And he was. You could tell his attitude would show up once in a while. But he was a reporter. I love reporters. They're out there today like Robert Costa, Michael Schmidt, Michelle Cinder. These are people that come home after they've done their reporting and provide it to the audience, but they've reported. That's what they do. And it's so hard today to do that because even the New York Times is infiltrated now, spoiled, I think, by opinion in the A section. It shouldn't be there. But it's hard today because you got somebody like Trump out there. It's not what balance isn't the right answer because you can't balance truth against that, what he's saying. There's no golden mean between a lie and the truth. You can try to tell the truth. And but a lot of people, they marshal their arguments using facts, but it is an argument they're making. It's not a report of the truth. And they act like Republicans are all no good. And all we need is a country run by progressives and everything will be great. All we need is all progressives. That's nonsense. Because this country were run by progressives, would have crime rates going up, would have inflation going up because there'd be nobody to restrain them.
So, Chris, with what you said about the role of journalism, let's talk about your shift into journalism.
Yeah.
That started actually in print. You became a writer for the San Francisco Examiner. And so I'd like to ask you about that kind of transition to journalism and particularly to print, but also whether your experience in politics gave you better sources and more insight than some of your other colleagues and whether that helped you in your journalism career.
Well, I think you're right. What you suggest is true in both cases. I mean, I know what it's like to be in a back room with a politician. I know how you think, sweat it out. They all think politicians have Machiavellian genius. They don't, or they think that they're idiots. Neither are true. They think about a week ahead. Politicians, they have maybe a couple of weeks ahead. You know, I'm sure Biden's people, Ron Klain, his chief of staff, and I think some other smart people around him are trying to calculate what this summer's going to look like, and what they're going to get done by the end of this session, what they have to get done, how they're going to try to find their way to 60 votes. God help them for anything in the Senate. How they find themselves to 50 votes for reconciliation, so that what they can pass through a simple partisan vote. Trying to get, knowing that if they don't get anything through, they're going to face an election next year where all it is going to be is the negatives: inflation, crime, and the border. If they don't get anything through, the only conversation will be about crime, violent crime spiking, inflation growing, and the border out of control, open border. That's what I just read that today, but those are my big three. There's always a big three politicians know they can use against the other side. Murray Chotiner figured this out in the 40s. People can only think of three things when they go into the voting booth. Make sure all three are about your opponent. Make sure all three are negative. It was communism, Korea, and corruption in 52. It was acid, amnesty, and abortion in 72. Now it's going to be, here it comes, 2022, inflation, crime, the border. That's enough to win with. And throw in all the woke stuff too, and that'll add a little icing to the cake. I do think I benefit from the politics. I'm sympathetic to politicians because they have the guts to run for office. I do have that prejudice. I do respect politicians who just have the guts to put their name out there and run and find a way to get elected. That's networking. Yeah. And but I also think there's a difference between writing columns with an opinion and writing my Sunday pieces, which were objective. David Broder used to do both. He would do opinion columns, and he'd also do straight news reporting. It's doable. People can do it. People are smart. People don't have to be prejudiced if they don't want to be. This thing about you can't control your politics. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. If you have if you're sentient, if you know how your brain works. Wait a minute. I'm not here pushing a case. I'm not here to. It's a great line in Cider House Rules. What's your business here, right? And a great line. They say, "What's your business here? What are you doing here?" I'm making apple cider to sell. You don't put cigarette butts into the big pot. And I think if you're going to put cigarette butts into something, it's not. If you're going to spoil it with partisanship, it's not teaching. It's just arguing. It's just
let's go
press
back.
Releases. Press releases. Sometimes I listen to some people in the air and I go, "That's a press release from the DNC or the RNC. That's a press release." That's what they would type out if I were placking for one of those organizations. That's what a flack would write. Just knock it out and argue a case and ignore all other truth. Some people talk like that.
Going back to your career, you mentioned, and I found this very interesting, that Roger Ailes was the way you got onto cable TV.
Yeah.
And that seems counterintuitive to those of us.
Well, yeah, because next thing he was
MSNBC.
a genius, he was a mad genius. You might say a bad one. It's certainly his personal behavior is awful, monstrous. But he was the guy that figured out to go on Dan Rather's show, if you're George Herbert Walker Bush, and say, "Yeah, I'll come on the show and talk about Iran-Contra if it's live television." This is how smart Roger was, because once Rather got on that show, George Herbert Walker Bush said, "I was out of the loop. You can't judge a person's whole life by one incident. And by the way, it'd be like me judging you with the time you walked off the set during that tennis match. Remember? That Rather quit. He wouldn't do the broadcast because he's so angry because they delayed the CBS News because they were covering a tennis championship, some big tournament. So he stuck it right to in live television, and that went right out the airways. And Dan Rather, who's a friend of mine, is back on his heels, looking like the bad guy. This is the kind of stuff Ailes knew how to do. He could just be smarter than the other side. Go live. You control the time if you go live. If you go in 60 Minutes or something like that, they control because they edit. They have all the power in the world. Television, once you have the tape machine.
But how did he get you onto cable TV? What was the connection there?
Well, I was with Joe McGinnis, the writer, who had gone to my college, Holy Cross, who had written Song of the President, which Roger Ailes was a star in, about how Nixon got elected in '68 when Ailes was Nixon's guy, his media guy. And I was having dinner with Joe at the Grill in Hollywood, in Beverly Hills. And we were talking about a book he was writing about Teddy Kennedy, which he later wrote. And he said, why don't you join me afterwards for drinks? I'm meeting a guy really like over in the Four Seasons Hotel, and also in Beverly Hills. And I said, who's that? I said, Roger Ailes. I said, Roger Ailes is the enemy. I don't want to deal with him. But I went over and we had a beer or two. And I said, this guy, we hit it off. And I said, I wanted to do a fast-paced TV show, really fast. Half hour, the most exciting things that happened that week. Sports, entertainment, politics, world events, but only the most exciting stuff you'd put into a capsule. And I want to be fast-paced, and I want to narrate it. And put it on 11:30 Saturday night or Sunday night, just for people that don't want to watch television, but they want to know what's going on. Just for the smart people that have very little time. So we worked on that idea. And as he was working up that idea, he got the job of heading up MSNBC, created MSNBC, America's Talking was called then, and CNBC. And I called him up. I said, how about that show we're going to put on? Remember that show we're going to put on, Roger? So he gave me, right over that, he gave me a 5-night-a-week show called In Depth, which I co-anchored with Terry Yanzer from LA. She's a real anchor woman out of me. She got to Stanford at the same time my wife did. And we did the show like 2 hours a night. It was a lot of work, but we did the OJ trial almost every night. And then he gave me my own show for a half hour on CNBC. And then and he had been sort of pushed out by then. And then that ended up, and then I had that, and I pushed to get there to MSNBC. So he played a big role in my life. He was always good to me, and then I find out about what he'd been doing, and it's terrible, monstrous behavior. People don't talk about that to other people generally. That's my observation. They don't brag about being monsters.
And was that show? The show ended up, of course, being Hardball.
Yeah.
And which was a long running show. I remember your anniversary show, but in the end, and you do talk about this, I've heard you on air talking about the end of that show and your career at MSNBC based on inappropriate comments that you made.
It depends what you say. I mean, inappropriate is right. That's accurate. It could also be taken as compliments. We're sitting in a makeup room. I'm in a makeup chair. I sort of bark out, how come I haven't fallen in love with you yet, to the person sitting next to me. Everybody heard it. The report was made. I had no choice really but to resign or retire. I just felt like I'm not going to go through this, some sort of sanction that's going to keep me here in a dispute. I was 74 then, I'm 75 now. I said, I might as well just retire rather than argue this case. And everybody I know has a different view on it. So it's usually not gender, it's usually age. People my age say, compliments are inappropriate, but they're not the worst thing, But younger people have a different view. But my daughter has a different view. She's a business person. So it's gender to a large extent.
Well, what advice would you give to others based on that particular experience?
Well, the rules at NBC was no comment. Well, you know this, Joe. You're just asking. Everybody knows this. Don't compliment people on their appearance, their dress. Don't say nice outfit. Don't say I love that dress. Don't say anything. You're looking good today. The safe answer is don't say anything about appearance in the workplace. Now, I may have gone further than that and say just don't make comments about appearance. Well, obviously, when people are dating or they're social friends, they make comments like that, and that's certainly up to them. But I think, obviously, don't break the rules.
And don't break the rules that are the current rules is really what you're saying.
Well, I decided when this happened that I wasn't going to get on the other side of the argument. I wasn't going to justify it. I can certainly explain it in terms of my personality, which nobody's surprised that I would say something like that. And certainly the makeup women at the time told the person who reported on me that that's just the way Chris is. That's the way I am, but inappropriate some. I actually take serious. I don't want to make this light because it's not light. I am, from the time I started having any control over things. I really pushed, like I insisted that my Sunday show, the Chris Matthews Show, was always 50-50 gender-wise. Always the only person who's that, I said, we and Nancy Nathan, exactly, we created the show. We said there will always be 2 men and 2 women on the show every single weekend. It's never going to change. We're not going to go, oh, somebody knows more. No, it's always going to be 2 and 2. All the best executive producers, Tina Urbanski and Clank, they've been my top people, and they've been people I've trusted to run the show. So I have a big belief, and my daughter, my wife, was an anchor woman in DC for 15 years. I mean, I know the challenge of getting equality in the workplace, and I pushed for it. But in this case of compliments, I obviously complimented one person too many.
So we want to end our show by taking this fully intergenerational. And this is one thing I've really adored from your show as well as your book, is that you took your show, Hardball, to college campuses and got more students involved in politics. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about why you decided to do that, because that's not something that every anchor does, and why you think it's so critical. You thought it was so critical for young people to participate in your show.
First of all,
directly.
It was great show business. It was great show business. I mean, show business. It was fun. It was staged well. We walk into a place. It took a lot of money to build these sets. In some cases, we had to build the sets like we did with Obama in Westchester University of Pennsylvania. I mean, you build the set. You get the high school, the college band to play. You get the cheerleaders there if they'll come out. And you get cheerleaders, and you get the excitement of a big football game. And you get the rah-rah spirit of the college life. And you're trying to put that on television. But what you do to the students is you're bringing politics to them. And, we did programs, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger, we did a lot of the sort of colorful figures. Jesse Ventura, we did double up with him. These are popular, iconic figures. But we also did, my favorites were John McCain in Clemson, when he's getting beat up down there for all these horrible charges against him by the Republican establishment, saying that his daughter was his adopted daughter from Bangladesh was his illegitimate, or he had fathered her, that she was part African American. Just awful, stupid things, just to try to make him look like the bad guy down there, or that his wife was a drug person. Come on, he's facing horrible stuff. But when in that room with those kids, he was a rock star. When he walked into this war hero from Vietnam, this guy had been through the worst. Those kids went wild for him. And same when we took him to Villanova. I think we had in his second campaign when he actually had the nomination, we had the biggest crowd he ever had at Villanova up in Pennsylvania. And the schools, I love the way the schools got into it. They'd bring out the band, they'd bring out the cheerleaders. The kids were rah-rah. And I'd go out and do the warm-up before the show and kid around with the kids and have my little quiz show I did for them. I was at a quiz show I did them. But I loved doing it. I did exactly the way you said. In fact, we brought politics to them. We didn't ask to come to us. We brought it to them. And we showed it could be fun and fascinating.
I mean, there's really
I wish we could keep doing that forever. I would do that every day of my life, every week of my life. I could keep doing it. That's one thing I do miss. I miss everything, but I miss the college kids and Hardball college tour.
There really is no experience like going to like a political rally or going, I remember my senior year, no, actually my junior year, no, sorry, my senior year. Yeah. My AP government teacher took the whole class to the Iowa caucus, and like, it was something that my peers and we will never forget, because it's a moment that like young people get to experience politics and civics up front and close. And so that's something I appreciate about your show.
Maybe you can help me write my next book, because I think I want to write about civics and how to excite people who don't give a darn. Like, I'll try this with you now. So ask kids, how come you have to be 16 to drive a car? Who made that decision? How come you can be still technically drafted in this country? Who made that decision? Who made the decision you can't drink till you're 21? Who's making these decisions? Your life is being controlled by people making laws about it. They're limiting you. Who's doing that, and how's that work? I'm just trying to find the stake. In my era, it was the Vietnam War. You didn't have to ask. The federal government was going to draft you, send you to Vietnam to fight a war. You don't have any interest in fighting. So how do you get people to get interested in something they're not naturally interested in? We started this discussion today talking about how I was naturally interested in politics. Well, maybe other kids were interested in sports and they know the third string quarterback on the Browns. some people are interested in things I can't believe what they know about. You know, how come Jimmy Rowland's did he get a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract? The second baseman. I don't care, but people do. So how do you get them to make that kind of mental and emotional commitment in politics? I mean, if you're a person of minority, if you're a minority, a person of color, you've got an issue right there. And you go, you know, my rights aren't really being observed in this country. I'm not really being included. What can we do about that? How do I get equality out there again, real equality? So, you know, there's some people who have a natural, if you're a woman and you're very concerned about being denied rights and opportunities and equal pay, there's another incentive to get involved. If you care about abortion one way or the other, pro-life, pro-choice, that's an issue. If you're a gun owner, you bet your bottom dollar the gun owners are, my brother's one of them. That's the only issue he votes on, guns. He has his guns, and he doesn't want anybody taking them away. So how do we get normal people involved in politics? I mean, like, not gun owners, but people that have other interests, whether it's just a better country. How do we get people involved in just a better country, better on civil rights, and human rights, and better on equal chances? Get those good people involved. Climate, in your generation, has grabbed a lot of people's interests. The Sunrise Movement, that's worked. It defeated a Kennedy in Massachusetts. Yeah. So it's there.
You know, if I can say one last thing, I know Jill might have some more comments, but in terms of civics, I was fortunate enough to have this one teacher who brought us to the Iowa caucus, and his motto was basically making civics a lifestyle. That, you know, civics isn't something that's just in the classroom. He really strived to get civics and this idea of participating in democracy outside of the classroom. And like every single one of his students just experienced this attachment to civics and experiencing it.
Email that, you guys, that person's address to me.
Okay.
That's one of the people I want to get to, because I have a friend of mine teaches down in Tampa High School. He teaches like international baccalaureate and dance plays and all that stuff. You're into it. And he, I keep saying, there's got to be like Samuelson in economics. What is that for political science? There doesn't seem to be a canon of knowledge that can be imparted to people in two semesters. I'd like to do one semester on running for office and one semester on governing. I haven't figured that far, but I would love to write the Samuelson book next, the book that everybody uses.
Yeah,
definitely.
Exactly. Well, you've heard networking in action right here with connecting Victor's civics teacher to Chris Matthews and Victor to Chris in writing his next book. And if you include a chapter about women and their rights, I'm with you too. So I think networking, we've proved its value. And we thank you so much for having taken the time to be with us and being patient with the technical glitches. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
So Victor, I loved that interview. Chris Matthews was an incredible guest. And I want to talk a little bit more about his point about networking and how it played a part in his career, and maybe share some of the times that it's helped in my career. I mean, I got my first job at the Department of Justice because I happened to meet someone who worked in the Department of Justice. I got my great job at Motorola because I got introduced to the CEO by a very dear friend, and my job at CPS, the Chicago Public Schools, because another friend introduced me to Arnie Duncan, who was the superintendent. And I know that recently I've been able to help you with some networking. So maybe you can share that experience.
No, I mean, just hearing your career and how networking has played a huge part has been so beneficial for me as someone who, I guess, has only had 2-3 years of actual work experience. But I'm currently working or interning for the Better Government Association, which is an organization that Jill is a panel, or she's a board member of. And it's been such a great experience. And I think just going back to that importance of networking, I think it's something that young people don't really learn. And for me personally, it's something that I learned my junior year of high school. I was in my AP junior language class, which is like an English class. And basically it was the summer before we all had to apply for colleges. And this teacher was probably the most transformational teacher I had. And she gave us a sheet of how to talk to people about recommendation letters and how to ask people for connections, and also just to ask them for this recommendation letter. And her biggest piece of advice was don't email them, talk to them face to face, because it's much harder to say no in person than it is via email. And so a lot of her lessons stuck with me, and just now being with Jill and learning just the intricacies and also just how to connect with people on a deep level and kind of network with them has been an amazing thing. And I think it's something that Chris Matthews really captured in our episode today.
Exactly. And I think one of the things people don't know about networking is that it is a continuous process. It's getting to know people and staying in touch with them and doing favors for them, thinking of them, sending them notes saying, I thought you might be interested in this. I actually got my job at MSNBC because someone I met when I was writing my book sent me a note about taking a class in how to write an op-ed. And I took that class. And as a result of that, I was noticed by MSNBC. So all of these things really play out. And it is a two-way street. It's something that you must do. And opportunities are out there that you will never know about except through this process.
Right. And one of the things that he said during the interview was just getting to know your college friends and staying in touch with your college friends. And I must say, that's probably the one thing I missed the most about this first freshman year. It was all via Zoom. And I met maybe 2 or 3 people. And I really can't wait to go back on campus and follow Chris's advice of just getting to know people. And then after graduating, staying in touch with them, because you never know what might happen or what opportunities might arise because of your network. And so I think it's important, like Jill said, this is a continuous process, not just something that you do once and then, it's the end of it.
Well, I hope our audience has learned from that little discussion and that they enjoyed the conversation on all the topics that we had with Chris Matthews.
I guess if I can ask one question, Jill, just for our younger listeners, because you've had such an illustrative career, what advice would you give young people on how to talk with people? Because like we've said, this isn't something that you learn in school, and none of my other classes taught me how to talk with other people. And so I'm wondering how you do it and how that, I guess, should be approached in a classroom setting.
Well, one thing I would say in terms of networking particularly is if you have a goal in mind, share it and be specific. It's very hard when someone contacts me and says, I'd like to brainstorm with you. If someone calls and says, I know that you're on the board of the Better Government Association, and I see that they have internship programs, and I would love you to introduce me to them for that purpose, that's easy for me to do. If you call and just say, I'm thinking that I would like to change careers and I don't know exactly what I want to do, that's a harder process. So being forthright and candid and clear, but having a real goal definitely helps the person that you're asking for help. Tell them what you want them to do and tell them you know their experience and how it can help you. That would be my biggest advice in terms of being successful. And then follow up. Let the person know that it worked. Call them and say, I got the job. Thank you very much. Because otherwise they're not motivated to help you a second time. So I think those are the 2 key things in networking.
I think especially having gone through the college application process, one of the things that teacher also said is have a real relationship with who you're asking favors for. Because the one thing that she hates the most is getting a call from a parent or having a student who maybe talked to her once ask her for a favor. It's like, do I really know you? So have that relationship as well, I think has been beneficial, at least for me to hear, and something that you've also told me. So I'm grateful for that.
No, I get a lot of requests from total strangers saying, my cousin is doing this. Would you write a letter of recommendation? I don't know your cousin. I can't say anything. If I wrote an honest letter, it would say, I know a relative of this person and they're very fine, but that's not going to help the student. They would be wasting the letter of recommendation. I know that also as an employer, that if I got a recommendation from someone who clearly had no working knowledge, it would not be effective. It would be a waste and would probably be a negative factor. So keep that in mind as well. Only ask people who you actually have worked with and who actually know your capabilities.
Definitely. I hope for anyone who's in their college years like me, or anyone who's just graduated from college, that they'll take this conversation and your career as well as Chris's career and how networking has been beneficial and apply it to their lives as well.
And take a chance. Go for that adventure, as Chris said. I've enjoyed our conversation, Victor, and I've loved talking to Chris Matthews. I hope our audience has too, and that you'll listen and follow us and come back for the next episode, which is a guest that Chris mentioned, Joe Kennedy, who lost the race for Senate.